Senate Democrats failing to end debate on the financial reform bill. Democratic Senator Evan Bayh is on the Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee. He voted in favor of ending the Senate debate, but some of your colleagues, even on your side of the aisle, Senator, and welcome, but did not. This, to the average viewer out here, we're so confused as to what is happening. I guess each senator wants his own stuff in there, and he may just temporarily block something even if he's going to vote down the road. Is that what's happening?
That's pretty much what's happening, Joe. Senator Feingold objected to the bill, and also Senator Cantwell. I think Senator Cantwell has some concerns in the derivatives area. So before this is all over, the floor of the Senate may start looking a lot like those pictures you're showing from Greece, only the floor of the Senate may look a little more turbulent than Athens.
And then what happens in committee after this is one of the things that people are saying, Senator, hedge fund guys, there's uncertainty, and when Germany unilaterally takes action with short sale, that's one thing. But they're talking about the uncertainty about what is finally in this bill as sort of casting a pall on things as well. Do you know what's going to finally be in this bill when it becomes law?
No, not yet. As a matter of fact, I've got some significant concerns I've been assured will be worked out at what's called a conference committee. So, getting it through the Senate is only the next step. The final step is where the House and the Senate come together and work out their differences. And there are some significant ones that remain. So this whole process has been, it's in microcosm, an illustration of the dysfunction that has gripped the Congress. I'm on the Banking Committee, as you mentioned. We had no votes in the Banking Committee. We had no amendments. We didn't have a chance to work through some of these issues. And so that really means that there's a lot less clarity than would otherwise be the case. And I'm sure that's very concerning to the markets that are wondering ultimately what's going to happen.
Well, it's not, Carl, that wasn't Carl's fault that the Banking Committee did. It wasn't mine. Whose fault is it, Senator? Is it Harry Reid? Who's running things there? Do you know? I mean, does anyone know?
Well, there are fingers pointed all the way around. The Democrats will say they offered the Republicans a chance to bring up their amendments and that the Republicans refused. The Republicans will say that it was just jammed down their throats. It's this endless cycle of recrimination, and it's hard to know exactly. The system's just stuck, Joe, to answer your question. Yeah. So ultimately the voters will have a say in all this. But right now, what you guys have been saying is absolutely true, whether it's Europe or in our country. Clarity and certainty leads to decision-making and investments and ultimately job creation and growth, and the government's not helping much with that right now.
Yeah. Do you think it would have been much different, Senator, if Dodd had kept it in committee? I mean, we all remember the day that he let it go to the floor, and we were going to be dealing with this issue with 100 people, not necessarily with expertise in banking, instead of on the committee. Would we be in a different boat by now?
Carl, I think you'd know a lot more about what the final product is going to look like, because a lot of these amendments would have been voted on. Right now, I have some major concerns, as I mentioned. I wanted to offer some amendments. Republican colleagues want to offer some amendments. We're not getting a chance to have a vote on these issues. Instead, we're being assured, well, this will be worked out in conference. Well, maybe it will, maybe it won't. We're going to have to wait and see. So the system would have been a lot more transparent, so that you and others who care about some of these issues could have looked at the committee and said, oh, here's how it looks like it's going to be worked out or not, and could have made your judgments accordingly. Now it's just a lot more opaque.
Well, go ahead, Mike.
Senator, one of the things that people have admired you for over the years, you speak very straight, and not a surprise that you're leaving that group on the one hand. On the other hand, for the viewers right now, could you tell them from what you do know, what viewers are likely to experience after this is over? Some people are saying it's likely we'll have less credit available and more fees. Is that too simplistic?
Well, you'll probably have less volatility, Mike, given what we've been through. There's a strong desire, an appropriate one, to try and make sure we don't have a repetition of the crisis. But in doing that, you are likely to have, the cost of credit be a little bit higher. So there's a major provision in this bill to protect consumers from being abused, and that's a good thing. No one wants consumers ripped off. But it's a little ironic if the cost of credit to the ultimate consumer is raised in the process. So there's some truth in what you say.
Okay. Senator, we had an election that we've been talking about recently here, and I've heard, like everything else, I've heard both sides declare victory, and I've seen recriminations on both sides. How do you view what happened on Tuesday?
Well, it was a strong anti-incumbent statement, and I think we're going to see more of that in November, Joe. Given what's happening in our country and around the world, what the PIMCO guys have coined as what the new normal on your show and elsewhere, slower rates of growth, I think we're just in for a prolonged period of political dissatisfaction because the economy is unlikely to be growing as strongly as people want, creating the kind of jobs people want. So there's just going to be this constant churning where the ins will be voted out, and that will repeat itself in a constant search for a better path. So this November, I think the Republicans will make gains. Whether it will be enough to actually take over the Congress or not, I don't know. I do think the economy is likely to pick up enough that, well, 2.5 years is an eternity, but I think the president's prospects are probably still pretty good. But if you're placing bets here this morning, the Republicans will probably pick up some seats in the House and the Senate this November.
Who said President Bayh?
You don't want to scare your viewers like that, Mike.
Yeah, 'cause I've heard there's even arguments about calling it anti-incumbent. You know, Fred Barnes is in the Journal today saying it's not anti-incumbent. It's anti-big government, anti-Obama policies. He's obviously a guy who comes from the right on all this stuff. But when you think about the feelings of hope and change in 2008, a lot of these incumbents that you're talking about were swept in on that hope. And obviously a lot has changed in a year. So, I mean, in a year, suddenly it's throw these bums out that we were so happy about. Doesn't that have to mean that some of it is against what we've seen in terms of expanding government and I don't want to say moving towards a Euro socialist state, but that's what you'll hear from people on the far right, that we're moving too far down that path. Isn't it possible that there's some of that?
Well, for every action, there's a reaction, and any time that there's change in place, that's a little unsettling. And these problems, after all, aren't easy to solve, or they would have been solved a long time ago. So there is some of what you say, Joe, particularly on the far right. But if you look at independents, take Massachusetts, for example, where, you know, that's one of the most democratic states, maybe the most democratic state, and yet Scott Brown won. If you look what was bothering independents, who tend to be the swing group, it's the deficit, the debt, the sense that the finances of the country are just out of control. The Republicans didn't do a good job of that when they were in. Now they get the sense that the Democrats, whether for good reasons or not, aren't doing enough either. So my strong advice to my party is let's focus on the debt, let's focus on the deficit, let's prove we can be fiscally responsible. That's the way to win the hearts and the affection of the independents again.
You know, polls are you can't count on, but if you look at where polls were on health care, and then health care, and you saw the way it went through, and that was even uglier than the financial, than the FinReg. Now, I know it's a great victory, and that's what we're hearing it spun as now at this point. But do you think there's any simmering resentment for the way that was done?
Well, in my state, there's certainly a lot of uncertainty. You know, people, and my take on the health care bill is it's not going to be as bad as the opponents suggest, and it's probably not going to be as good as the proponents suggest. It's going to take a period of several years to kind of work our way through this. And the big issue there, Joe, the big thing that's still on the table is what really bothers most folks who have insurance is the cost of the insurance. And there's nothing in this bill that's really going to bring that down in the near term. So that issue is still there to be dealt with.
That would have been good.
Ask the people in Massachusetts.
So it is a good thing that we're covering 35 million people who don't have insurance. Right. It's a good thing that we're reforming the insurance market to deal with pre-existing conditions and all that kind of thing. So those are good things. But the big thing, the increasing cost of health care, is still there, unaddressed, and, boy, we've got to tackle that eventually.
Do you want to go?
1 out of 2 ain't bad.
Senator, we appreciate it. And when is your last day? Are you got a little calendar? Or are you like cast away?
Yeah, little clock on my desk, Joe. It's the first week of January sometime.
You don't have it down to the minute. You probably have it down to the day. Anyway, Senator, appreciate your time today, as always.
Good to be with you.
Okay.